I don't think anybody questions how supremely powerful the shield is in Doom the Dark Ages. So, is it possible to beat Doom the Dark Ages without using the shield? At least in combat. Let's find out. And of course, the first thing we gotta talk about is our difficulty settings. Pretty much I went with a default ultraviolence setup, opting not to do nightmare because I don't totally hate myself, and you'll see that the game is plenty hard anyway. And the effects of not shielding are noticeable right away as we take a bunch of damage to this hazard that was obviously intended to teach you to use your shield. As we move forward into this first fight, it's not really anything difficult since it's nothing but fodder, but there is a lot of them and you were obviously expected to make use of the splash from shield bashing, which we aren't able to do, so we have to spend a whole bunch of ammo. Still though, this is pretty easy, but later on in the mission actually ends up being kind of painful. And here we are met with our first obstacle. Initially, I was going to try to circumvent all these even outside of combat if I could, but I realized that there were parts where this was impossible later on in the game and ended up giving up on this. But for the first few, I just do this silly wheel clip, which just lets you walk through walls whenever you have the weapon wheel up, because that's a thing. Yep, it's a Doom game. And we're also introduced to the big-ass imp. Somebody told me in the comments on the last video what he's called, but I already forgot. But he's not too difficult, and we're ready to move on to the next fight, which is the exact same thing, but now with more enemies. At this point, there still isn't enough enemies to really overrun me, so it's kind of easy. And now we're given access to the Power Glove. This is helpful in the early game because it does more damage than our unupgraded weapons, but later on in the game, we'll be ditching it for the other melee choices. Entering this fight, I learned about a very important tech for us since we don't have access to shield bashing for splash, and that is the jumping splash. Instead of doing shield bashes, we could just do a sprint jump from a slightly elevated platform, and it will have a similar amount of splash to doing a shield bash to take out all the fodder. This ends up not being useful later in the game, but it's pretty helpful here in the early game since all we have is this dinky shotgun. But eventually we clear this fight and head towards the blue keycard. And now we're on to the first real fight of the mission. We have a Pinky as well as a bunch of other demons, including heavies. We're just taking a ton of damage for no good reason. Ultimately, I think this problem comes down to Doom Guy being so fucking fat in this game that he developed his own gravitational pull, which just sucks all the bullets into him. So we have to make very good use of our resources and kill enemies while we're on low health to get our health back very frequently. And if that fails, well, I'm just dead, simple as that. We can't afford to make any mistakes in this run. And I ended up dying a lot throughout this first level. The shotgun isn't a very strong weapon, and with the shield bash currently being our only real expected way of doing good splash damage to the fodders, and parries doing the most damage in the early game, we're left with some absolutely awful DPS and no survivability. But the more I'm playing like this, the better I'm getting, and I start making good use of my resources, like building up the third hit combo to be able to one-shot that big ass imp. Here, we're given access to the Spiker, which will be our second weapon. And to be honest, this thing's kinda ass too, but at least it has some more range than the shotgun, so it's at least a safer option. But with this thing grabbed, we can keep pushing through the level. The real difficult fight doesn't really happen until after we've taken out these 4 portals. But of course, not before being killed by a random ass projectile. But with all that being taken care of, we were ready to move on to the beach fight, which ended up giving me a really hard time. Remember, this is the first level of the game, and it's meant to be super easy, and I'm already dying multiple times just going into a single arena. So this doesn't bode well for the rest of the game. I want to show you guys all the combat here because I feel like it showed the awkwardness of trying to play like this really well. So here it is. And killing that last pinky triggered the fight to end and despawn the rest of the demons, so we were ready to move on and finish off the level, which is just the turret section, which plays exactly like normal since there's no blocking on that. But it's also super boring, so I'll spare you. And entering the next level, we're given access to the shield saw, which of course we won't be using in combat at all, but unfortunately there are going to be parts outside of combat for stuff like opening doors that we are going to have to use it for. And right away from there, we're introduced to the middle shield guys, who you're intended to heat up the shields of and then throw the shield at. But since we can't do that, these guys are actually super painful to deal with because we have to just sneak around them individually and shoot them, and they like to show up in large packs like this. And these guys are going to remain very painful to deal with, at least until we unlock the yo-yo gun a little bit later. And I did have to use the shield to open the door, but we won't use it in any combat. And getting into this arena, we're introduced to the Hell Knight, which can be a little bit of a scary enemy because they jump after you and do parryable melees that are pretty hard to dodge. And for now, they're a pretty difficult enemy, but later on in the game, we'll get weapons that can one-shot them, and they end up not being too bad because of that. I struggle to dodge them at first, but if you just keep your distance, they won't be able to do anything to you, and you can just pick them off from safety. You just have to watch out for other enemies shooting at you while you're dealing with them. Further into the level, we're given gold and access to the upgrade station, and we decided to grab the upgrade for the combat shotgun that lets us drop armor from enemies. This is helpful because it just adds to our survivability, and right now we just want to start getting more powerful as soon as we can, even though the combat shotgun's not going to be that amazing later on in the game. Since we don't have a shield or anything else that we can upgrade that will help us later on, I just go for the shotgun. And in here we're introduced to the Stone Skin Imps, who you're intended to just shield bash to one-shot them, but since we can't do that, we have to just sit there and plink at them with shotguns, making them the worst fodder demon by far. And moving on to this fight, we have to deal with these energy shield dudes, and normally they'd be pretty easy because you could just throw your shield at them and they'd one-shot them, but for now we have to just do this bullshit because we don't have an energy weapon yet, but we will be getting one pretty soon, so that won't be a problem for too much longer. And I end up taking a death in here, and there's going to be a lot of one-off deaths throughout this run, so I might end up cutting some of them out, and only end up showing the ones where I die multiple times in a row, which ends up being a common occurrence a little bit later on. Another thing I've started doing in the early game is making good use of barrels, because they do way more damage than our guns do right now. Later on, I stopped doing this because we actually get powerful weapons, but just like the other modern Doom games, you start off extremely weak, so stuff like this ends up being helpful. Eventually, we make our way into the plasma rifle room, but before we can take it, we have to do another arena fight, which we also have to deal with 2 mancubuses for. And they're pretty annoying right now because we don't have any good weapons for them, so I just have to get distance and plink away at them until I can take them down. Unfortunately though, after taking out the first mancubus, I end up taking a bunch of damage because I'm surrounded in the tiny room, and I end up taking a death for it. Twice. But this next run goes a little bit better for me as I'm able to get a full melee combo on this mancubus and take him down pretty quickly, which is really important because it's such a tight space we're in here. I do end up realizing a little bit later in the fight I actually have an area I can run away to for space, but since all the demons here are fairly quick to take down, I can kill them and get health back and remain somewhat invincible as long as I don't take too much damage. Because whenever you're low health, every kill you get will drop health, and so you can just keep yourself getting a constant flow of health if you're in the right area. This is the point where I realize I'm able to back up and I start doing that, but I'm able to kite everything and finish off the room. And with this room finished, we're able to grab the plasma rifle. And this gun is a pretty decent upgrade to our current arsenal because it just does more damage than the other guns. It ends up being completely ignored later in the game, but for now it's kind of nice to have. And now we've made it to the outside portion of the level, and I ended up having my first real struggle here. I was actually doubting whether I should continue the run, because I knew with stuff like the boss type enemies, the game was going to get even harder from here. But I decided to buckle down and push through it. With each death, I was learning more things, and I got more familiar with the enemies, and after just one more death, I was finally able to get somewhere. And with that mancubus down, we were finally ready to finish off the level. And what better finale than an even bigger fight than the last one. But with this fight, you're given a lot more space, so it ended up not being too bad. But as would be the case with the majority of fights in this challenge, it did end up taking me a while to clear out just because you have to play the game a lot slower when you can't just block damage on demand. But after taking down our first Essence boss, we were ready to move on to the next mission. And this is Barrier Core. And obviously playing the mechs and dragons, there's literally no impact on the challenge because you don't even have a shield and you're just meant to play without it. Then when you add on the fact that these sections are just really boring too, I'm pretty much just going to skip over them in the video for you guys because these are really not the interesting parts of the run. This is just me trying to get through them as fast as possible. So getting into the next real level, we're given access to Skull Gun number 1. And no, I don't know what their names are. There's just the number 1 gun and then the number 2 gun that you get later. And this one is going to be very helpful for us. This one is intended to be a mob clearing device, but it also does pretty good damage against large targets, so we'll be using it for that as well. This is our new highest DPS weapon for now, and it's a very big upgrade on our previous weapons. Later on, we'll get the other Skull Gun, and it's even better than this one, but for now, this is a very nice choice for the early game. And once we get outside, we're introduced to the armored Mancubus, and these guys are really annoying. Right now, we don't really have anything that can do effective damage to armor, so we have to just sit there and plink away at it until it breaks. But since the Skull Gun can hit all of its projectiles on him at once, it does pretty good damage. A little bit farther into the level, we end up in this little arena where a bunch of Hell Knights spawn in an extremely tight space. But fortunately, now that we have the Skull Gun, we're able to take them down really quickly, and Hell Knights also aren't the worst thing to dodge once you get used to their attacks. Oh, and then while I was walking down this hallway, I got ganked by this giant crowd of Hell Knights, and at first I was really confused. Then I realized that there was a barrel that you were meant to kill them with, but I didn't make very good use of it, and yeah. But my second time through, I did a much better job of using the barrel on them, and were able to get through it no problem. And we can't forget the Skull Chipper as well. And before we head outside, we grab this ruby, which we're going to be saving up and using to grab upgrades on the Skull Gun, because that's currently our favorite weapon. And while we're grabbing more stuff, we go ahead and pick up the Impaler, which is, I believe, the highest damaging weapon in the game, so it's super helpful. Although unfortunately, since we're not using the shield, it does lose out on its ability to generate ammo, which is also how it gets the damage buff that makes it so good, but it's still a very strong weapon either way. Whoops. This fight wasn't actually all that bad. I just took a silly death, which I do pretty often throughout the run. And sometimes I'll show them, sometimes I won't. It just depends on what makes the video flow best. But with that fight done, we get to another upgrade station, and I spend the 1 ruby we have on the combat shotgun to let it fire in 3-round bursts, which improves its DPS quite a bit, and now it also gives us a lot of armor. And for the final challenge of the level, we're faced by the Vagory champion, and he is a big ass spider dude and is harder than all of the other spider dudes in the game, because why wouldn't this be the one that shows up in the early game? And I die immediately. And I hope you guys know that I had to watch the cutscene for this guy every time I respawned, because for some reason the checkpoint wasn't after that. But this fight was brutal. There's no other enemies in the arena for you to stack up on, so the only way to get ammo is from doing melees on this guy, and he has an insane boss stomp. So we have to kill him before we run out of pickups around the arena, and also just not take more damage than those would permit us. Eventually I get tired of dying and decide to use my life sigil here, and that was a terrible idea. I was holding on to it until I got him a little bit farther to use it, and I ended up just completely wasting it here. But with every try, I'm getting a little better at the encounter, and I start to develop a little bit of a strategy. The biggest thing I started doing is abusing the health gate system. Basically, in this game, you can't be one-shotted if you have a certain amount of health, and that amount is somewhere around 60. I'm not sure where exactly the threshold is. And basically, this acts as one-shot protection, and if you trigger the one-shot protection, you'll be given invincibility for a few seconds. And this is super helpful because you can just tank infinite damage in this time. So, combining this with all the health pickups around the arena, I'm finally able to sustain myself long enough to take on the fight. So let's see how it went. And now we have a dragon level. Yay. So yeah, I just stared at this for a while as I slowly made my way towards the diamond that I was blindly following, before taking a stop to land my dragon for a very meaningful part of the gameplay. This might be possibly my favorite section of the entire game. Absolutely one of the best. So you start off by forcing me to use my shield to trigger this load zone, and then that allows us to open up this door and hop right back on the dragon that we dismounted for 5 seconds to do that for. So yes, there was like, what, 30 seconds of animations or so, followed with 5 seconds of gameplay, which consisted of throwing my shield one time. Cinema. So after the 10 minutes of auto-scroller, we're ready to play the game, and we are faced with our first tyrant, cyber demon, whatever it's called. And they are pretty scary. This is basically the first boss type enemy that's just a regular enemy. He's never introduced as like a full-on boss, but he kind of fits the same bar as the other boss type enemies. And he's pretty annoying because he shoots us with his minigun whenever we're far away, and then he does parryable attacks that do insane damage to us if we get up close, which obviously we can't parry, so that will just immediately get us killed. So we have to play pretty careful with them, but with it being a one-on-one, this time it wasn't too bad. And in the next ship, we face our first ever Battle Knight. And these guys are similar to Hell Knights, but they have huge amounts of armor on, which makes them a lot tankier. On top of that, this is a boss variant, so he's a little bit tricky for us, especially since we don't have any way of taking out armor quickly yet. But regardless, we are eventually able to take him down, although it was a little bit of a close call there. And in this room we're given access to a new weapon, and I didn't think that this would be very consequential, but I ended up using it a lot more than I thought I would a little bit later in the game. Either way, this is definitely the better energy weapon, and since they're literally the same gun, just one is better than the other, might as well just use this one. I really don't understand this philosophy of having two guns that are basically the same thing, and then making you swap between them for some reason. I much preferred the mod system we had in Eternal in 2016 personally. And then a little bit later on, we're given the super shotgun. And I thought I would use the super shotgun more, but as it turns out, it really isn't that good if you don't have the shield to use during the downtime between the shots. So I ended up sticking with the combat shotgun for the most part, just so I could generate armor on demand. And to wrap up this fight, we had a large arena with a Vagory in it, but this isn't the boss version, so he ended up going down quite a bit quicker. I didn't end up dying in this arena or anything, so there wasn't a whole lot of note to it, and unfortunately, unlike the no weapons run, I feel like the combat in this is much less satisfying to watch, and I think it is partially because of the impact and like the slow motion effects and all that with the shield and melees. So there might be a little bit less of that in this video, but either way, this guy goes down without a problem, and we're ready to move on to the next level. And here in Siege Part 1, we're given access to the Flail at the start of the mission, which is going to be our new go-to melee, since weapons are going to be the majority of our damage otherwise, which is completely the opposite of the run without using guns, where we wanted the fists because it does more damage. In this case, the Flail gives us armor and does splash damage for taking out weak mobs, which is actually something we're kind of lacking since we can't throw the shield to take out weak mobs like you normally could. This mission is giant and just takes forever to complete, so I'm just going to cut to all the fun stuff in a little bit of a montage. And starting off the next level, we're introduced to the Revenant, who immediately kills me on sight. But next time, we're able to get through him without too much of a problem. The only real issue they present is that if they do the faster parryable attack when they go into their ghost mode, it seems to be completely undodgeable, so it's just damage that we will take no matter what. Either way though, this level doesn't introduce us to anything too crazy other than that. But we do start making use of the yo-yo gun, which we got in the last mission. And this actually ends up being a very important weapon for us throughout the run, since it's our only way of dealing effective damage to armor, and it is also a weapon that just does a lot of damage per shot, which is super helpful. And funny enough, normally I don't end up using the weapon very much in regular runs, just because parries already take down armor so easily. And a little bit later on in the level, I get killed by the boss in the final part of the mission. But next time, he's not so lucky, and we're able to take him down with a bunch of impaler shots and get that sweet, sweet health upgrade. And in the next level, we're introduced to whiplashes pretty early on, and they are absolutely infuriating with this challenge. They have super long range attacks that are really hard to dodge, which is always annoying. And even when you can parry them, these guys are just annoying because they don't return your melee charges when you parry their melees anyway. So yeah, fuck whiplashes. At least the yo-yo gun does pretty good against them. And a little later in the level, I run into this cyber demon, and he ends up getting the best of me after he gets me down low. I go run off to recover by killing some zombies, but he ends up trolling me anyways and makes me take a death. But in the next time, I realize I can actually troll him by making use of the drop from the impaler and using this hill so that he can't shoot me with his little minigun. And he goes down real easy once we start doing this. I just have to make sure I'm dodging the attacks coming my way, because as always, camping in Doom can be pretty punishing. And a little farther into the level, we're given access to the grenade launcher, which actually ends up being a pretty nice weapon for this run, especially since the rocket launcher, its main competing weapon that we'll get a little bit later, almost entirely relies on parrying projectiles for all of its upgrades. So the grenade launcher ends up being a much better option, and it also just has better DPS. And one short fight later, we're introduced to the Agodon champion. And this guy ends up being a really big problem for the run. I actually thought at first that this was going to be impossible, because anytime you get far enough away from him, he just puts up a shield and becomes invincible. So you literally have to let him do parryable attacks in order to damage him, and these attacks are all completely undodgeable. Or at least that's what I thought at first. They may not be dodgeable, but you can make use of cover to block them. Something I realized after a number of deaths and then seeing him do this. I knew that this guy would be able to be kited, and I had to just keep grinding until I could do it. So I started working him around this rock and beating my head against this wall. But even having a plan, this was still brutal. One mistake and I would be health gated and just a single shot from death. And this was going to be a very extended fight, because we're not able to stagger him like you normally can with parries. But eventually something was going to have to give. And that is the Agodon champion taken down. That was by far the hardest part of the run so far, and it made me worried about how we were going to take down the last 3 bosses of the game. But either way, we were set to move on to the next level. And this is the Forge level where we'll eventually be able to get our first rune, which is going to do literally nothing. And bang, boop, bop. Oh, not this guy again. Fortunately, with it not being the boss this time, he has a lot less health. And we also have this giant ball in his way that we can use to kite him. And now that I already know what their counter is in this challenge, this one doesn't end up being too bad, especially since there's not any other enemies shooting me while I'm dealing with him. And fortunately, we won't see too many more of these guys before we get the BFG, and then that's going to be our solution to them in the late game. And a little bit farther in, we're finally at the forge, we just got our rune, and we're given an extremely long fight to do here. This fight ended up taking me over 5 minutes of actual time to get through, and that was pretty much just because of the massive amount of enemies that it gives you to deal with. With the introduction of runes, the game expects you to be significantly more powerful, and since we aren't, fights are just going to start taking a lot longer now. But this fight isn't actually too difficult, you just have to make sure you're staying locked in for the entire thing, and there's nothing too crazy going on here. The leader boss is even a Mancubus, which is probably the easiest type of invincible boss here. So while we're going through this combat, I thought I would let you guys know that I've been trying to change up topics on my channel, and I'm trying to get into challenge runs. This will actually be my 3rd ever challenge run I've ever done, and I'm having a lot of fun doing it. But YouTube can be pretty punishing for people who try to change topics on their channel, so any support you guys can give me would be much appreciated. So if you want to see more videos like this, make sure you guys subscribe, and I also love getting to read your comments. But with this fight coming to a close, and not a whole lot of note happening in it, we're ready to move on to the next level. And welcome to hell. At this point in the game, while each fight ends up taking quite a while, the next few levels end up being pretty short overall still. And now that I'm getting more comfortable with my arsenal and I'm getting all of my weapons leveled up to the max, we kind of have an easy stretch for a bit. Things definitely pick back up towards the very end of the game, but this chapter of the game where we're sort of in that mid-late game area ends up being not too bad. One thing I notice is that without using the shield, I end up using a much wider variety of weapons than I normally do. And I think that mostly just comes from the shield kind of doing so many things at once that you could just kind of pick up a weapon that does the rest and you don't really need anything else. You could just use the impaler or the super shotgun for the entire game pretty much. But without having the shield to do everything for me, I have to use the different weapons for all their advantages, like the yo-yo gun for armor, the plasma guns for shields, and of course the impaler for the giant amount of DPS it does. But after getting through that fight, we're given access to the rocket launcher, which I do try to use some, but I end up reverting back to the grenade launcher pretty soon later on. That being said, both of the explosive weapons are pretty decent, but with stuff like the skull guns and the impaler, I end up just using those because they're a little bit more specialized in what they do, whereas the rocket and grenade launcher is kind of a more mixed bag where it can do pretty good mobbing and pretty good DPS. And now we're at this fight for the Amethyst and the Atlas battery. And here we just have a Vagory, but this guy is basically nothing now, despite them being a bit of a problem early on. The yo-yo gun just 3-shots their armor, so they end up going down super quickly, and once we knock their armor off, we can just make use of one of the skull guns to absolutely cook him. They'd still go down even faster if I could parry the attacks, but either way, these guys are basically a non-issue at this point. Also, this fight overall is just pretty short, surprisingly, but the other 2 fights that I skipped over here were a bit longer, but nothing really interesting happened, so I just cut to this point. But with him down, the rest of the fight is easy, and we're ready to move into the Atlan. And something pretty nice about this mech level is that you can actually just run past 90% of it, which is great because it's super boring, so doing it faster, really nice. And now we're out at the next real fight at the start of this mission. And you'll see I'm still kind of making up my mind about using the rocket launcher or the grenade launcher more. And for now I'm just using the rocket launcher, which to be fair does have a much better splash radius, and it's really nice that it shoots in a line. But honestly, whenever you get the chain shot fully upgraded, it has a big amount of splash anyway, and with it just doing more damage and also being a hard counter to armor, I find myself just using it more and more as I go farther into the game. And like I said, this level is super short, so all we have left is this Agodon hunter who is also an armor upgrade boss. And he does end up killing me, but because there was a pretty long fight before we got to him, I decided to just use up a life sigil. But from that point, it's not too bad because we have these giant thick pillars, and we can use that to kite him around and prevent ourselves from taking more damage. But these guys are always going to be slow pains in the asses to kill until we can just one-shot them with the BFG. But at this point, I had the strategy down, and we're able to take him down and move on to the next level. And here in the next level, we're back at the Sentinel base, and we're given Skull Gun number 2. And this is a huge weapon for the run. Not only does this gun just do a ridiculous amount of DPS, it also drops health and ammo just from doing damage to enemies, which is absolutely wild. So this is definitely going to be a staple for the rest of the run. And after getting the upgrades for it, we're ready to give it a go in some actual combat, but unfortunately this fight isn't the best suited for it. It's basically a gun for wrecking bosses and anything tanky, but it's not very effective against armor, so we still end up using the chain ball quite a bit. When I first get the gun, I end up being a little bit too aggressive with it, and I end up losing a bunch of health to just doing stupid things with it, because even though it does drop health from damaging enemies, it's not enough health to keep you alive if you're not avoiding a decent amount of damage still. But you can see even with it not being effective against armor, it still absolutely shreds through this Maykr armor, just with the raw amount of damage that it can do. And this is actually an interesting clip because you see I get a good amount of health back, enough certainly to be back over health gate, but there is actually a little bit of a cooldown, and you won't receive one-shot protection if you already recently had it, which I did in this case. And this will be a problem a little bit later on in the run, but for now it's not that big of a deal. We just have to redo the fight, but this one isn't actually that hard. And a little bit later on, we're going to get a health upgrade boss, which is going to be a great demonstration of how powerful this gun is. You can see even though he has armor, we could just melt through it using the skull gun, and his health is going to go down so quickly now. And another demonstration of how crazy Skullgun number 2 is. You'll see that we can just absolutely shred through Cyber Demons now like it's nothing. And since we're getting health back for shooting him now, we're actually able to somewhat counteract the bullet spam because it doesn't actually do that much damage. It's just the amount of chip damage and continuously getting it that causes problems normally. So with just a little bit of movement, we're able to take this guy down like it's nothing. Another thing to note is that enemies actually still take damage while they're in the execution state, so if you're not going to kill them with the execution, a lot of the time it's better to just keep shooting them through it instead of actually going for the glory strike. This is going to be a really important thing with bosses later, but it also applies to Cyber Demons and Komodos a little bit later on as well. But this was pretty much the last major fight of the level, so now we're ready to move on to the next one. And now we have a dragon level, and I think that you guys know exactly what that means. And right at the end of this level, we have a big leader fight. Basically, this is just a major arena, and then we'll be ready to finish off the level. And I think the best way to do that is to just let you guys see how the combat went. And here we are on to the next level, where we're going to be given access to the BFG eventually. But first, we have quite a bit of combat to get through before that. Starting off with the introduction to the Komodo champion, the boss variant of what will eventually just be a regular enemy. And he gives me quite a bit of trouble. While unlike the Agodon hunter, you can damage him from far away, so it always seems possible, the problem is that he is super aggressive, he has a massive lunge distance, and he's super fast. I guess unlike Doomguy, he managed to retain his movement speed from Doom Eternal. With his ridiculous amount of lunge, it's also possible for him to just do it straight through walls as well, so he ends up bringing me a lot of pain. And just to make things even worse, id recently did a nerf to the Ravager against the Komodo and the bosses of the game, so the best weapon against him is much weaker than it was like a week before I recorded this. So if you're wondering why I'm not just tearing through him using this gun, that's why. But the more I'm playing against him, the more I'm learning. I started using the Cycler to apply shock to him, which lets me do damage faster and get stuns in quicker. And then I'm using the stuns to get back over health gate so I can take more damage from him, because it's just inevitable to take damage against him. And after many, many deaths, I go in with a game plan, and I'm ready to get this done. and with him taken care of, we were left to the open-ended side of this mission now. So this was a dragon mission, but there was also a lot of regular combat, but nothing really gave me too much trouble. I might have died here and there, but there was nothing really holding me up. But this level was super long, so I was starting to get fatigued the longer I went through it. Because you have to go around to 3 MacGuffins and do big ass fights around them before you can press them, and even then after doing that, which could have constituted the whole level, you have even more after that. And on top of that, you had the boss fight before all of that, so this was one of the longest levels of the entire playthrough. There was also a lot of brutal parts in it, which we'll see coming up pretty soon. While we're doing this though, I thought I'd ask you guys for some help in the comments. I'm looking for more challenge runs I can do. It can be in this game or in others. The main ones I've been considering already are like Halo, Gears of War, Skyrim, even Left 4 Dead, and obviously I have the other 2 modern Doom games as well. I actually even have the old Doom games too if you wanted to see those. But I think that's enough delaying. Let's get to the fun part. So the fight after dropping into this hole was definitely a surprise for me. The problem with this fight isn't actually the amount of demons, it's what demons that there are and the small space you're given to deal with them. We start off with a bunch of armored dudes, so we use the chain shot to take them out, and it's no problem here at the start. But then a little bit later, we get one of the Agodon dudes, which still isn't the end of the world. We just have to kill a couple of regular demons and then take him out as we can, and we have these big pillars to deal with him. But it still took me a while to get through him just because he kept getting hits on me, and I didn't want to waste my life sigil on a fight that shouldn't take that long. But after I eventually got through him, I wasn't ready for what happened next. This fight ended up being way harder than I thought it was going to be. Because after I finally was able to kill the Agodon Hunter, after so many deaths and wasting my life sigil eventually, the fight wasn't even done. I still had to take on a Komodo and a boss revenant at the same time after that. And this fight ended up being brutal because of that. And with that fight done, we were ready to immediately go and grab the BFG, which would have made this fight 1,000 times easier if we'd had it for this. So that was a little bit frustrating in the moment. But either way, now that we have it, we've got a great tool for taking on these boss type enemies in the future. And man, after taking on this arena without ever using a gun, it felt really good to use the BFG here. And yes, I'm calling it the BFG. And if that upsets you, you should leave a mean comment. That way I get more engagement on the video. Thank you very much. Either way, with this part done, we're nearly finished with the level. There is a little bit more, but there's nothing really difficult, so we're just going to move on to the next level. I'm freaking sick of this place, man. And into the next level, we're introduced to the Cosmic Baron, and he gets the best of me my first time fighting him. But in my next attempt, we're able to take him down no problem. Well, maybe a small problem, but I'm able to recover. Since the nerf for the Ravager didn't apply to these guys, he doesn't take too long to take out using it. But I do mess up the execution on him. Not a glory kill, execution, very different things. So I have to fight him for a little bit more, but he's low health, and it doesn't really give me too many problems. And here in the next fight, we're introduced to the Wizard, something like that. Basically, these guys show up in pairs, and one of them is invincible and the other one isn't, and you have to just kill the one that isn't invincible. Then the other one will be opened up for you as well. But they do have a lot of health, but fortunately their attacks aren't too hard to dodge, and we're able to take them out without too much of a problem. And here we're given access to the Dread Mace, which is going to be our new go-to melee weapon. The Dread Mace is easily the best melee weapon in the game, although I didn't realize it when I first started playing. But it does a ridiculous amount of burst damage, it staggers bosses, it gets you back full ammo, and even without being able to make use of parries to have a lot of uptime on it, it's still a great choice for the run. And we get a lovely little fight to make use of it, but this fight isn't very difficult because it was made to be owned by the mace. And a little bit later on into the level, we're given a boss Agodon hunter to fight, and I think you already know what we're going to do to him. And after that, we get a conveniently placed BFG shot here on the ground, have to take care of these two enemies who show up here for some reason, and with all this taken care of, we're ready to move on to the last fight of the mission. But of course, not before grabbing the upgrades that are relevant to us for the mace. And of course, we finish off the level by taking out the last few heavies, and then using the BFG against the giant turkey. And he's taken care of, and that's the mission done. And we kick off the next level by smacking the shit out of this Revenant with the mace. You gotta love doing that. And now we're given a leader fight pretty early on in the mission, but at this point I've kind of hit my flow state with the game, and I start just cruising through things, and anything that gives me problems I just delete with the BFG.
Think fast, Chuckle Nuts!
And later on in the level, we start hitting some really cool combos using the mace, and I'm just kind of having fun with the combat at this point because it's really not too hard right now. Like here, I melt this guy down using the Ravager for a bit until I get him into a Glory Strike, and then we just give him a nice bonk with our big ass stick, and he's ready to go down. Then we just have this idiot who we take out using the Chain Ball a bit, and then finish off using the Ravager. And yeah, he absolutely cooks for this gun. The Mancubuses are one of the easiest enemies to have as leaders in these fights. And I realized later on in the game, I was actually using the lower DPS setting on the Ravager, and I should be using the other one that makes you move slower but do way more damage. So yeah, he got cooked regardless though, and we were ready to move on to the next part. And a bit later in the level, we get to do this double Vagory fight, but these guys are an absolute joke with the fully upgraded chain shot at this point, so they go down like nothing. Once we pop all their armor off, we can just shred them with the Ravager, and they go down super quickly without any sort of risk. It's crazy how far we've come since the Vagory boss we had at the start of the game, which gave me a pretty hard time. But yeah, with this fight done, we're pretty much ready to finish off this level. And here we find ourselves in the belly of the beast, pulling a Gears of War 2 inside the old one. Ooh. And there is a ton of combat in here, and it's a super fun time. And I think it's best shown in a little bit of a montage of all the fun parts. So let's get into it. And in the next mission, the pace doesn't change as we're given access to the Berserk power-up, and we just get a nice little power trip where we just destroy everything in this area. While the game might seem easy now, this is just the calm before the storm because the last 3 missions are going to have boss fights that are going to be absolutely terrible under this rule set. And you guys will see what I mean once we get there. But for now, we can just enjoy having a relatively easy time in the game and just destroying everything with the Broken Skull Gun while we have the Berserk power-up. And man, does it feel good to just absolutely shred through all these things that have been causing me problems at various parts of the game, and just destroy them with the damage multiplier we get here. We even get an Agodon hunter that spawns, but we can just instantly melt him point blank by just face tanking him and shooting him with the Ravager. And yeah, no problems from this arena. Let's move on to the next. And here I take one of the most ridiculous deaths I've ever seen. Basically, I take a bunch of damage here, and then I accidentally run into this spike and die. Probably the world's first person to ever die to one of those stupid spikes, huh? And after that, we get the infamous Hallway of Doom where we have 2 buffed up whiplashes. And I think it's hilarious that this is honestly harder than a lot of the other actual boss fights in the game, just because of the ridiculously cramped space and these super tanky whiplashes who are some of the most annoying units in the game. But on my second run through, I can do this pretty cool move where I splash them down with the grenade launcher a bit, and then get them both with the mace and get them down into glory kill state. They actually can tank a mace hit whenever they're buffed up by the blue guy here, so that's why I can't just do a mace hit. We have to also do some grenade launcher shots or some other form of splash. Some people might also opt to do a BFG shot there, but I want to save those for stuff like Agodons, especially the boss versions. But since I only had 1 shot, I wanted to try to save it on this guy if I could, especially since there wasn't a lengthy fight leading up to him. We basically got to deal with him right away off of the checkpoint. So I decided to just slowly pick him down using our automatic weapons. The Cycler does really good damage against them because of the nerf damage the Ravager has. So I decided to go with that instead of using the Ravager on him, even though I would get some health back for using the Ravager. Either way, this guy lets us take us down just using our regular weapons, which is super nice so that we can hold on to some of our BFG ammo for some more scary targets later on. It'll also be nice to carry some of it into the boss fights because it does a huge amount of damage and stagger to them. And to finish off the level, we have a nice little leader fight here, but he gets absolutely cooked by the Ravager. Probably because we had a Berserk power up too, but yeah, we're ready to move on to the next level. And of course, the next level starts us off with another leader fight, and this one also doesn't give me too many problems. We're able to take him down, and after that, we hop on our dragon and ride on up to the fat man's ship. There was actually some more combat before that, but nothing of interest really happened. So I'll just show you guys me bullying the dragon section, which is still boring as always, but we're able to get it done pretty quickly, get into the Kreed Maykr ship, and take him on. So that was a surprisingly strong start for the Kreed Maykr, and I knew if I got that far on my first try, I should save my second life for one of the other boss fights, because I knew that Azra was going to be absolutely terrible. So we know that this fight isn't going to be too hard, at least this phase in the fight, because we all know that Doom bosses always have multiple phases. So let's go ahead and get this guy taken down and move into his second phase.
I'm worth more to you alive than dead.
And in this one, he puts up this shield so we can't damage him, and he does a bunch of parryable attacks that we are completely unable to avoid. As far as I can tell, you can't dodge these. No matter what I did, I would always get hit by them. So we basically had to just hope for RNG that he would stop doing this attack and not do too many parryable attacks during this time, or else we'd just die at the start of every attempt of this fight. Later on though, I realized that you could just shoot his shield down with the plasma guns, so I'm just a big idiot. But yeah, the start of this phase didn't go very well for me. And at the cost of a life sigil, that was the Kreed Maykr down. And I didn't realize it now, but using my life sigil there was a terrible idea, and I was going to regret it later on. For now though, no thanks. And the next mission starts us off with a short mech fight before we get into the Agodon fight. But mech sections are boring, so I think we all know what that means. And with that done, we're on to the final fight with Azra. And this fight is absolutely brutal for us without blocking. A wise man once said that this is where the real game begins. No matter what I did, no matter how much dodging I did, no matter how much health regen I tried to use, I just couldn't get away from enough damage from Azra to survive. He was killing me over and over and over, and it just felt like there was nothing I could do about it. The recent nerf to the Ravager didn't help either. At least with that, we might have been able to kill him fast enough for him to not kill us first. But in this state, things weren't looking good. I was not having a good time, but I had changed up a few things throughout the runs and started being able to get farther and farther. The first thing was I finally switched to the setting that does more DPS on this gun, and that made me able to kill him a lot faster. But even that wasn't enough, and it just led to tragically close attempts. But a few more deaths later, something finally happened. I learned the most important part of doing a no-shield run on Doom the Dark Ages, and that is that you cannot stand and fight. You have to rip and tear. Yeah, you didn't think we were out of this yet, did you? That was just phase 1, remember? And it only gets harder from there. So, of course, we're back to the mines. There wasn't really anything different I needed to do for this phase. The only thing that changed was just these spikes in the field, but they don't really do anything anyway. But I just wasn't able to replicate the good RNG for the attacks I had in the last round. Maybe he had some more attacks that were undodgeable in this phase, I'm not entirely sure. All I know is that this phase whooped my ass for longer than any of the other ones. I tried using different weapons, I tried switching the optional modifiers on the weapons for our upgrades. I tried different approaches, I tried timing the mace better, I tried getting double hits with the mace by getting my attacks interrupted so I could hit him twice with it. I tried using the BFG on him, but nothing seemed to be working. But the longer I was trying, I could see the farther I was bringing him down with every phase, and at least at this point I was able to get him through his first stun pretty consistently and come out of it with decent health. But I was having to optimize literally everything to get anywhere. It was to the point that I was shooting him while he was stunned because he could take damage like that even if it was reduced, and then going for the glory strike as late as I could into that timer so that I could still get the health back that I needed to stay alive. But after a very long time of beating my head against the wall, something weird happened. I'd tabbed out for a bit, and when I came back, he wasn't able to attack me. I don't really know what happened here, but it was definitely nice to be able to get out of this phase. So, while he just sat there unable to do anything to me, I just wailed on him with the Ravager until he finally went down. Of course, this was only the second of 3 phases for Enhanced Azra, and he started being able to hit me again in the 3rd phase, so we still had more to get through, but I caught a break from the game on this one, and I'm going to take it because, like I said, this is a modern Doom game, and they are always filled with crazy glitches. It's sort of like Skyrim in that regard. I mean, it's even published by Bethesda, come on. And going into this, I tried to shoot these guys with the Ravager, but I wasn't able to kill them before they got to me, and I was taking damage. But fortunately, they were still giving me health whenever I was low health when they hit me, but yeah, it didn't go well for me my first try. But I did realize a little bit later on that I could use the Impaler on them and it would work way better for stopping them. Our next problem was this attack, which I thought was also undodgeable, but you actually can, it's just super difficult. So aside from those 2 attacks, this was pretty much the same as the last ones. We just had to get lucky on Azrak's attacks well enough to be able to survive. The nice thing about this is after you kill all of those Blood Makers, you get a huge pile of health just sitting on the ground. So if you do take damage from these attacks, you can go and pick that up and get all your health back before you start the real fight. And it was the same old stuff from before, like needing to use my mace appropriately to cancel his attacks. Unfortunately, if I swung a little bit too late, he would cancel my attacks and then I'd just get cooked like I did there. But I found that this phase was actually easier. It seemed like he was spamming the guys that give you health more often, and that ends up being really beneficial for us. So it took us a lot less time to take this guy out than the other versions of him. Or maybe I just got really lucky with his attacks. I don't know, man. Either way, we've finished the final phase of Enhanced Azra, and that was easily the hardest part of the entire run. There's not even a question about it. And that is including the fact that I got an invincibility glitch halfway through. And move. God fucking damn it. And moving into the next level, we have a wonderful start, where I just instinctually throw my shield at the group here, but I load the checkpoint before it hits them, so run not invalid. And would you believe that it only took me 20 minutes to beat the rest of the game, including the second fight with Ass Crack? Because that's exactly how long the one with Enhanced Agodon is way harder than the one that has the witch in it. And I was completely locked in after the last fight, so I didn't even die a single time on the way there, despite this being some of the most intense mobbing of the game. It is the last mission after all. I always thought it was weird that this was the last mission instead of the last one, because that fight felt super final. Like, he was in his enhanced form where he was all powered up, and then we just get this extra mission where we do some regular mobbing, and then go fight lame-ass version of him. Like, why is this a thing? Why didn't the witch just show up for the third phase of Enhanced Azra, where we basically just did the same thing twice in a row for one of the phases? Like, the second phase could have been replaced by the third phase, and then the third phase could have the witch in it, you know what I mean? I don't know, it just makes for some really anticlimactic endings to these videos. But without further ado, let's get into the final fight. And with that done, I finally beat Doom the Dark Ages without using the shield. Open parentheses and combat close parentheses. If you guys made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you very much for watching. And if you want to see more challenge videos in the future, make sure you subscribe, like, comment, all that. I'd love to hear you guys' ideas for what I should do in the future. And I also have a Discord server, so make sure you hop in that if you're interested. There's a link down in the description below. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.